Welcome everyone to Westpac Foundation's Social Scale Up Grant webinar. I'm Sinclair Taylor, the CEO of Westpac Foundation. As we get underway, I thought we would just run through a couple of webinar house rules. Firstly, asking if you could all put your phones on silent and mute any background noise. There will be questions which I'll answer at the end of the presentation, and please use that questions panel to put your questions in throughout the webinar as they come up, and we will look to distribute answers to questions as part of the wrap up to this webinar. So you will get a written response if we can't get through all of those questions during this next hour. So moving on to the agenda, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the foundation itself, and of course more particularly what we're looking to achieve with the Social Scale Up Grant. Then we'll look at eligibility and funding criteria, what we're looking for in a strong grant submission. We're really keen to share insights that we've gained certainly over our 10 years of funding social enterprises, and also share some of the tips, what we observed in last year's grant round. Then we'll look at what other resources are available and the key stages and dates as we move through the process. And finally, of course, a Q&A session. So in terms of the foundation itself, Westpac Foundation is quite old. We're 137 years old. So very old, not quite as old as the bank itself. Westpac itself turns 200 in a couple of months' time, or actually on the 8th of April, so very shortly. And since 1999, the Westpac Foundation has been providing grants into the community. And a key focus of our funding, as many of you would well know, is social enterprises. And the reason we do that is that we want to provide more opportunities to Australians who need it most, and really this is about us addressing with the work that we're doing with our grant recipients many of the structural issues that cause social and financial disadvantage. As noted there, of our $30-odd million of funding we've provided, around half of which has in fact gone to social enterprises. And social enterprise has become a very particular focus of the foundation over the past 10 years because we see job creation as a very important way of addressing many of the structural issues that face people who are typically excluded from the mainstream workforce. And as we all know, having a job is not just about the employment and the economic benefit that provides. There's also a very strong and tangible social benefit to the individual, as well as, of course, the broader community. So we're trying to bring all of that together with our social enterprise funding to create more job opportunities, more training opportunities to help people into the workforce. And this also very strongly aligns to Westpac's core purpose as an organisation. And as a bank, we're very interested, of course, in facilitating economic development and enabling more people to participate in the economy. And having a job is a very, very key way that you can participate in the economy. In terms of context and scale of our 20 social enterprise grantees on our books at this stage, in 2016 they collectively created 830 jobs and around 3,000 employment pathways for Australians who experience disadvantage. So quite meaningful from our perspective, and we're looking, of course, to grow that number over time, and we've made a commitment as a foundation to continue to fund social enterprise because we can see the results that it is creating. And one of the things which we'll touch on obviously as we move through this is the importance of that record keeping and the metrics around it, and the longitudinal I guess analysis of how these organisations are progressing and how successful are they at creating more jobs, more pathways, and of course what role can we play as an organisation to help foster that growth of what is an increasingly important sector. So that's the foundation itself, and of course our interest in social enterprise. Then we've got our Social Scale Up Grant, which is why you're all here. And the Social Scale Up Grant we kicked off last year, so this is the second year of this grant this grant phase. For those of you who know a little bit about our journey over the past 10 years with social enterprise funding, and those of you who may have dialed in last year, I made the observation that as a foundation and as a board, we've made a very deliberate strategic decision to shift our funding into organisations who are trying to scale. So these are organisations who, almost by design, are well beyond the initial dreaming or startup phase. They are operational, they've got some momentum and are now looking to grow to the next level and scale up their business enterprise itself, but as importantly, the social outcome, and the social outcome being more jobs and more training opportunities. So this Social Scale-Up grant does replace our previous Seed and Explore and Strengthen grant programs. And as I say, we've made a very deliberate decision to shift our funding a bit further along the curve of development into organisations that have passed that initial hump of getting operational. What we're looking to fund is what we describe as being proven models, and we'll touch on this a little bit further on as to what we mean by that. But as I've mentioned earlier, this is about backing organisations that have got operational, have got staff, have got programs underway, are actively recruiting people, and I've got through those initial couple of years where we know all businesses, social or otherwise, go through that teething and growth phase and are now looking for additional financial support to get to the next level. Our target groups are laid out there. No changes in that from this year to last year. Indigenous Australians, refugees and asylum seekers, youth at risk, people who've experienced homelessness, domestic and family violence, mental health issues, which we all know is increasingly important, and of course people living with a disability. We've chosen those audiences on the basis that we know that they are overrepresented in unemployment and underemployment statistics, and of course we want to address that through further job creation or creating those training opportunities which lead to that first job opportunity. We'll be once again awarding 5 grant recipients and we'll be announcing those later this year, and we'll be committing $300,000 to each organisation that we back. However, we'll also be coupling that with non-financial support, and this is through our More Than Money program where we match Westpac business mentors drawn from across the Westpac group. We've got 40,000 staff spread across the country, whole range of job roles and experiences, and we are very active in recruiting Westpac Group employees into the Foundation's fold to then line them up as appropriate and as needed with organisations that we fund through the Foundation. So that's our articulation of skilled volunteering, and we believe it is an enormous value add, and certainly the feedback we've had from many of our grant recipients really speaks to the importance of that aspect of the program. We know the money is important for good reason, that's fairly obvious, but we believe the value of our people over time is also pretty important to work with boards and management teams of our grant recipients. Here are our 5 Social Scale-Up grant recipients for 2016, so our inaugural Social Scale-Up grantees. Some of these brands and names will be familiar to you. Top left we have Jigsaw Business Solutions, part of Fighting Chances on the northern beaches of New South Wales. We thought they were a real find last year, and a very unique disability or sector employer, and unique on the basis that they're operating a digital scanning business, offering digital scanning services to government departments, local government in particular, as well as large corporates who are trying to become increasingly paperless, and very importantly with the Jigsaw model they pay award wages, so it's not a subsidised wage, they're paying full award wages, which we thought was quite unique and certainly a standout organisation last year. Bottom left we've got the Bread and Butter Project, fairly prominent and well known social enterprise that backs refugees and asylum seekers and gets them into artisan baking and teaching them the skills to become bread and pastry chefs. And we also know that that's a highly sought after profession, and the Bread and Butter have had great success in transitioning their trainees into full-time employment within the hospitality sector across Sydney. In the middle we've got Green Connect, who create jobs for resettled refugees and young people in the Illawarra region in just south of Sydney. And they do that by keeping waste out of landfill and composting. They also grow chemical-free food with an urban farm down in Port Kembla. Top right, we've got Barmer Services. Barmer is an Indigenous-owned civil construction, building and landscape service business. They're based in Cairns in Queensland, and they do a lot of civil work up into Cape York, road building in particular. And Barmer employ local Indigenous people and really support them to be active agents in their own development. Then bottom right corner we've got Street in Melbourne. Street tackles the problem of youth disadvantage and homelessness in Melbourne, and they do that by using their hospitality businesses to provide young people with supportive pathways to careers in the hospitality industry, and that's also about helping them solve their own broader personal challenges, and with a very strong social support model built into the street business. So that's our inaugural Social Scale-Up Grant recipients, so 5 great organisations, and of course we're looking to add 5 more to the mix this year, so hopefully that gives you a sense of the I guess the depth, the breadth and the calibre of organisations we are looking to fund. To give it a little bit of context, last year we had I think 140 social enterprises apply for those 5 grants, which of course suggests it's a very competitive process. And I say that not to deter people, but I guess to provide that voice of realism that we are looking to really back organisations that strongly align with our criteria and really are poised to scale up and grow, as I say, not just their business, but the social impact of their business. And as I say, we'll unpack that a little bit more as this conversation unfolds. So let's look at our eligibility criteria. These top 4 dot points form part of the eligibility criteria we've got in our self-assessment survey, which hopefully you've seen online through the Westpac Foundation website. And that survey is available in a PDF online. It's also part of the application form that you would fill in Smarty Grants. However, we will also provide a link to that in a SurveyMonkey format after the webinar, so you can complete that online if you wish. We've introduced the self-assessment survey this year to really help, as I say, give that sense of realism to applicants' prospects in moving through the grant phase. We really acknowledge just how time-consuming grants like this can be, and the amount of effort required to I guess to go through the grant process. And we really want to make sure people have a very strong sense of what their prospects are. Of course, we can't guarantee any of these outcomes, but we want to help shape and guide each organisation who's applying as to whether they're a strong applicant, whether they're high potential, or whether in fact they're unlikely to be shortlisted. And of course, organisations can use their own judgment as to how much effort they want to put into it and how much time they want to invest. But as I say, we're very, very conscious of how much time these types of applications can take. So these criteria haven't changed year on year. We are still looking for employment generating social enterprises. We are trying to address some of the structural barriers to unemployment experienced by people within our target groups. We're looking to support organisations who've already themselves created 10 or more employment opportunities or training opportunities. And we say 10 or more, once again, to give people a sense that if you're in that startup phase and you're just getting underway, it's possibly too early. In fact, it is too early to apply. and maybe it's something you might do in 2018. And these are, I guess, minimum standards, and this is based on the quality of applications that we saw last year. We only fund organisations operating in Australia. That hasn't changed, and of course we need organisations to be DGR Item 1 recipients in order to be eligible. So these eligibility criteria, as I say, form part of the self-assessment survey. So I really encourage you, if you haven't already, to dig that out as a document. As I say, there will be an online link provided post the webinar, and run through that self-assessment survey to really map out in your own mind where your organisation is at in the process. Can it say yes to those 4 questions? And of course, if it can't say yes to all of those questions, there are other options, and another important option, certainly if you're a DGR Item 1, is to apply for our Community Grants program, which opens on the 1st of May this year. Last year we provided 100 grants. These are $10,000 grants. We provided 100 of those in 2016. To align with Westpac's 200th birthday celebrations, the Foundation will be providing 200 grants, so $2 million of funding through that program, which opens on the 1st of May. We're looking for the same target audiences. Yes, we're interested in jobs and the like, but we're also interested more broadly in what organisations are doing to improve the quality of life for those audiences. So by design, a broader program than just job opportunities, and they are smaller grants. We've had quite a few organisations over the years who have started off with with a community grant from us, and then over time have moved into our social enterprise funding pool. One example is Toowoomba Clubhouse up in Toowoomba, who focus on mental health, and we provided them a community grant a couple of years ago, which funded their initial work around the social enterprise that is now Vanguard Laundry Services, which opened in Toowoomba in January, which Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull opened, and will create around 60 jobs for people who are experiencing mental health issues in the Toowoomba region. So there is certainly an opportunity to progress over time, but I don't want people to, I guess, miss the opportunity. One thing I stressed last year is that you can apply for both grants, so don't feel that you have to put your eggs in one basket. If you want to also apply for a community grant, please do so. We'll now look at the selection criteria. So just to provide a little bit more context, I've used the word proven a few times. What we're looking at here in terms of what we're going to get in the applications, of course, is more detail around your business plan and your strategy, and certainly over the next 3 years. Shortlisted organisations will, of course, be required to give us more in-depth information beyond what you might just put in the initial application in the coming weeks. And what we're looking for here is the quality of the plan, and of course its projections, and really just the level of thinking that has gone into it. We're looking to back sustainable businesses, acknowledging, of course, that all social enterprises struggle at times with the same issues that for-profit enterprises struggle with. Issues related to cash flow, the capacity to access finance, getting money in the door from suppliers and customers. They're ongoing business challenges, so we're very realistic about that. But we want to see a robust plan that really sets out what the growth strategy is, certainly over the 3 year of the grant cycle. We're also looking for evidence that you are already generating at least 50% of your total revenue from trade. And we've put this in as a benchmark just to once again provide a bit of context as to the, I guess, the maturity of the organisations we're looking to fund. Many of our grant recipients, or certainly of our 5 grant recipients this year, were well over the 50% when they applied, and are moving towards the 80s into the 90s% of their revenue generated from trade. As I say, we do acknowledge that social enterprises have diverse funding sources. They are partly reliant at times on government funding or and grants from philanthropic organisations like ourselves, partly reliant on fundraising to prop up possibly the unprofitable aspects of their enterprise. But over time, we want to make sure that the enterprise and the trade itself becomes the key driver of that business, and it grows at a greater rate than reliance on other funding sources. Looking for that proven model around job creation and employment pathways. We note here, of course, that some organisations are one or the other, so it's not that we're only looking to fund people who themselves are direct employers. We know there's organisations who do a much larger role, play a much larger role in the creation of employment pathways, which leads to job opportunities elsewhere. And we also know that some organisations help people into self-employment. So once again, by definition, the organisation is not their employer, but they're helping create other employment opportunities. So we're very interested in a myriad of models, but once again, we want to see that it's proven to the extent that you've actually got some track record, and then you can share with us through the application process what your learnings are, and of course what you're looking to do differently in the coming years to further grow that model. We're very interested, of course, in the workplace support model. This is often an area which applicants are looking to get funding support for, acknowledging, of course, that by virtue of the target audiences that you're looking to either employ directly or once again create training opportunities for, there's often additional social support costs that a for-profit business often would not even have to contemplate, that really add to the economic burden of running a social enterprise. So we're very keen to see the maturity and I guess the complexity of your social support model, how you fund it, how you resource it, whether that's resourced in-house, whether you're reliant on other agencies externally to help plug those gaps. But as I say, we're very interested in the funding that may be required to grow some of those roles. We're interested, of course, in the quality and the strength of the management team and the board, and this is looking at, I guess, from a business governance perspective, at the depth of knowledge that both those respective groups have in the underlying business operations itself. So what is the nature of the business of the social enterprise? How much do those people know about that business and that industry? And equally, what is their depth of knowledge around the social support challenges? And we know that many organisations will have a blend where you'll have some people who are very strong on the business itself, less strong personally on maybe some of the social support elements, but we are looking at that diversity across that group to really get a sense of how well managed the organisation is. We want to back organisations that have thought through the importance of good governance and certainly have recruited accordingly. That said, of course, we are looking to support organisations in this regard, and one of the things that people who've been through this process before with us will know is that we place a lot of emphasis on risk and finance analysis, and a lot of that risk analysis is addressing and helping the board and the management teams address some of the business risks, and that business risk could be the lack of diversity, for one example, within the board or the management team, or the lack of planning around succession. So we're very keen to help organisations to think through those issues and plug some of those gaps. We're also looking for a strong commitment to measuring social impact, and as I guess grant applicants, you're no doubt all well aware that many organisations, for good reason, are asking lots of questions around how do you evidence that your approach does provide an impact. Can you prove that empirically, not just anecdotally? So we're interested in how you measure your social impact, I guess the quality and the sophistication of that measurement, what you do with that in a reporting sense, how does the board and the management team review that information to help shape and adjust the program over time. This is increasingly important for us as an organisation so that we can make sure that we are backing organisations who are strongly aligned to the social impact we're trying to create, both as a bank but also as a foundation, and we're really interested here in the analytics. That said, of course, we're keen to help organisations who are looking to evolve their thinking in this regard and look to measure this on an ongoing basis. And finally, of course, we're looking to fund organisations who, in fact, need our help. That might sound like an odd comment to make, but some organisations are at a scale already where a $300,000 injection from the Westpac Foundation would be lovely to have, but may not be absolutely necessary, and there may be more appropriate funding sources or other ways that organisation could think through how it could scale up beyond a grant. So we want to have a very clear story from the applicants around what you would do with our 300K, how will it help you scale the business, and as I've mentioned numerous times, importantly, the number of people it can train and employ, and making sure there's a very clear link between the funding and that employment or training outcome. So we'll move on now to look at some tips for a strong submission. So this is just really trying to provide some feedback on what we've observed from previous years. The term elevator pitch is, I guess, increasingly common. The proverbial, what would you say if you were stuck in a lift with someone for 30 seconds? And this is about being succinct and clear with your messaging. And what we're looking for here is, if you had to tell someone in 30 seconds, what does your social enterprise do and why is that important, what would you say? So this could be convincing friends and family as much as it is about convincing us. So a clear and compelling description is important, and being able to put that across very succinctly, we believe, is a very important message, and certainly as it relates to sales and the capacity to sell people on the why of your organisation. I would really put some thought into that. We want to understand what the business does and what's unique about that, what goods and services does it provide, of course, what is the social need or problem that you're trying to tackle, and why is that particularly pressing in your region or where you operate. We also are looking for realistic plans and projections, and I say this very deliberately because we're not looking for organisations to show us a 3-year plan that shows the business doubling in size every year and lots of zeros and growth added onto all of the numbers. We're looking more for, as I say, realistic, but the worst case outcome or the what ifs, not sort of the overly optimistic best case projections. So this is a good business management exercise, and we really want people to focus on not just the great possible outcome, if it all lined up and you've got all the possible grants, you've got all the possible contracts, what's the middle ground, what's the more likely outcome, and that's really what we want to see people put forward in their projections. And we also will touch on this more in our webinar around presenting financials and risk management. Those concepts are often quite linked, certainly in terms of the financial projections, to make sure that there is a strong basis for them and you've actually thought through these what-ifs. We're clearly interested in long-term relationships. It's not an accident that we've chosen to make a 3-year funding commitment through this program. We want to make sure we are connected well to the organisations that we fund, and I can say that we've got a very strong relationship with all the organisations that we fund because we have open and frank discussions, and the boards and the management teams of the organisations that we currently fund are very open and frank about their challenges, about the risks that they face in their business, and this is about us coming to a common understanding as to how we can best help. And best help is not, as I say, often a financial thing. It could be through other ways that we can connect organisations. It's about leveraging the skills of our employees where relevant. We also look to get people into our supply chain where relevant, so we can use our spending power as an organisation with those social enterprises. So there's a myriad of ways that we look to, I guess, build that long-term relationship, but it's obviously based on organisations being prepared to be open and frank with us. Please use plain English, and this is partly because quite a diverse range of employees from across the Westpac Group will help the foundation with the grant application or the review process. So please spell out any acronyms, try and move away from sector jargon. I think we know a fair bit about most of the enterprises, or certainly the sectors that are applying. That said, yeah, please try and convey it as clearly as possible as to what you're working on and why. Of course, there's a word count, so keep it brief, and I think this just goes back to the succinctness of the story. And of course, many organisations work up their answers in Word before they then cut and paste them into their grant application, just so you've got a good working draft that multiple people in your organisation have had a view of, to really try and make sure those answers are as crisp as possible. So resources, I've mentioned the self-assessment survey, so please use that. It's available in PDF through the website. If you're a previous grant applicant of ours and or you're on our email or our newsletter distribution list, you would have received a link to complete a SurveyMonkey version of that, which we will recirculate post this webinar. We've also developed grant guidelines, which are also on the website, once again giving some clear hints and tips around what we're looking for in a grant submission, what the stages are, what the eligibility criteria is, and of course what some of the definitions are. We've got some webinars coming up, and this is in April, so we've got 2 webinars coming up. One around presenting financial information and the second one on risk management. So these are on the 10th and the 12th of April. So this is well, arguably more relevant to organisations that we have shortlisted, and we're looking to shortlist 15 organisations. However, these are open to anyone, so even if you're not shortlisted, please feel free to dial in for those webinars. The first webinar on the 10th of April is presented by Richard Banks from our finance team, who will run through the way we think about financial projections and assumptions to help share some of that information to really, as I say, bolster, hopefully, the quality of the financial information. And the second webinar is on risk management, presented by Dirk McLeish, who ran it last year. And this is where Dirk will step through I guess Westpac Group's approach to risk management. Banks themselves, at the end of the day, are risk management businesses. We do lots of things, but risk management is a thing that we really have that underpins all of our operations. So Dirk will share the way we think about risk, and lots of those risk principles are relevant to every business, regardless of its size or scale. And we really want to help boards and management teams think through operational risks, diversity risks, all sorts of risks that you're all facing, and to make sure that in your application you've covered off those risks and really set out a clear story as to how you're going to address them as the business grows. So on to the key dates and stages. So the self-assessment survey is up. You can take that, of course, any time. We're underway, and of course the applications close on the 28th of February. The 31st of March is when we will be advising organisations as to whether they've been shortlisted or not. And we're looking to shortlist 15 organisations. Not sure, of course, how many applications we'll get this year. We don't have a target as such. It's not a case that we want to get more applications than last year. Of course, we want the right organisations to apply based on where they are at in their development, as opposed to just getting a volume of organisations who aren't ready to apply. On the 8th of May, we will be getting information back from those shortlisted organisations, presenting more documents to us. And during that period of time, of course, the business mentors that have been assigned to our shortlisted organisations will help work with the board and the management team of your organisation on that additional information. That's been a very successful approach over the last couple of years, and we also know that quite often those business mentors from across the group within Westpac have stayed connected to those organisations irrespective of the funding outcome. Of course, we're only going to fund 5, so the other 10 organisations have often ended up with a strong relationship with someone who is then helping them on an ongoing basis. May and June we'll continue our internal assessment and review process, and in July we will conduct our site visits, and we're looking to get that down to sort of 5 to 7 finalists, and our runners-up will receive non-financial support from us, and as happened last year, a lot of those organisations that are in our top 15 will be well placed and are all applying again this year, and that's really the continuum that we're looking to build year on year. That if you're shortlisted, you've come close one year. We're keen to work with you in a non-financial way to the extent that that's relevant, and really help stay connected to you as an organisation for the coming 12 months. Then in September we'll be announcing our 5 grant recipients, and we'll be providing funding in early October. So that's the key dates and stages. So we'll now have a look at the Q&A. So I'm just going to have a quick scan through some of the questions, and yeah, I'll call out to some of those. One of the questions relates to, I guess, the type of things we're prepared to fund. Are you interested in funding tangible assets over non-tangible requests? We are, and of course, many organisations will have a fairly definitive list of things they're prepared to fund. We are open-minded as to what we fund, but we want to make sure there is a clear, or to the extent that it's possible, of course, a clear link between our funding directly contributing to the growth of the business and the employment and training outcomes. So often we are funding positions that directly, I guess, bolster the capacity of that organisation to apply. So one example is Barmer Services, who were funded this year. So as a civil construction organisation, work health and safety is extremely important for them and their capacity to get further jobs, and certainly in the government tendering sense, having all the right accreditations. So our funding, part of our funding went to the employment of a work health and safety specialist in that organisation, with the view that there's a very direct causal link between that person's employment, the capacity for Barmer then to be very well organised in a work health and safety sense to secure bigger jobs to employ more people. So that's the type of link that we are looking for. At times we are less interested in funding equipment. So in an asset sense, we're less interested in equipment, unless of course there's a very direct story as to how that particular piece of equipment is once again going to grow the business and create jobs. So we are very open to funding, I guess, recurring overheads to the extent that employees are often considered a recurring expense. So hopefully that answers that question. There's a question about DGR status. So do applicants need DGR at the time of submitting or at the time of approval / funds transfer? So typically organisations have already got it before they apply, but we're very happy to talk to organisations who have applied and are awaiting approval. Of course, in a procedural sense, we would need to ensure that, or we can only fund a DGR Item 1 recipient, so we would not be able to fund someone who hasn't got DGR Item 1 status at the end of the process. As I say, people typically have got it up front, but if you're in that middle ground of you've applied for it and haven't quite got it, we are very happy to talk to you about that and progress on that basis. In terms of presenting reports on social impact, do you provide support and recommendations with how you would like this to be presented, or ways that have been effective in the past? So Lisa Waldron and Sally McGeoch in our team are certainly available to connect with applicants to talk through the social impact reporting. Many organisations now have that built in, I guess, as a standard management report. So we're not looking for people to build bespoke reporting to suit Westpac Foundation. Of course, we're interested in sharing our views on what we think good reporting may look like in a benchmarking sense, but we're really looking just to get a sense of what do you do today, how does the organisation use it, but Sally and Lisa can certainly follow up with people individually and really sort of flesh that out to get a sense of how we may be able to assist. Good question about is there any preference for local, statewide or national organisations? We don't have a particular preference as to whether you're a national organisation or doing something very locally. So Street, for example, is operating very locally in Melbourne. So Street is not a national organisation. In fact, none of the organisations that we fund are national. That said, over time, I'm sure a couple of those brands possibly will be. We are interested in geographic diversity, and certainly I would call out that we are looking for organisations in SA, NT, Tas and WA to apply. A lot of our social enterprise recipients, if you know those names and the locations I've described, are Eastern Seaboard based. So as an organisation, we are looking to fund organisations nationally. So yes, please apply from those other states, but that geographical spread is not our first consideration for obvious reasons. We're very interested in the impact those organisations are going to create, but no, we don't have a particular view as to, I guess, the scale of your organisation in terms of whether it's national or state-based. So a question about, I guess, our definition of a social enterprise. Does Westpac consider a non-profit organisation a social enterprise? So we use, I guess, well, we certainly reference in our documentation social traders definition of a social enterprise. The term is obviously broad. We ourselves, in a funding sense, can only fund DGR item 1s. So of course that narrows the field immediately. We don't fund for-profit social enterprises. Not every not-for-profit, of course, is a social enterprise. So we are interested in the trading activities of that enterprise. To what extent is it selling, producing goods or services, and using trade as a way of generating most of their income. We've very deliberately said we want at least 50% of the income to come from trade. Many not-for-profit organisations will have a social enterprise element, but it will be very modest, and it might be 5 or 10% of their total revenue. Those types of organisations, we believe, are on the journey, hopefully, to becoming a social enterprise, but it's not core to their business operations. So that's really the way we think through it. We want to see at least 50% of the organisation getting its money from trade, and its reliance on grants and government funding and fundraising diminishing over time, and quite possibly never down to zero. And we know that many organisations will never get 100% of their money from trade, but we certainly want to see it progressing from 50 to 75% at least over the 3-year journey. And as I say, with our current grant recipients, many of them are already into the 80s and 90% of revenue coming from trade. A question about whether we're inclined to fund growth or expansion into a second state. We do get a lot of questions about expansion into new locations. So I guess broadly the answer is yes. So to give a current example, Jigsaw Business Services is based currently in Frenchs Forest in Sydney, and part of our funding will go to help them expand into the Parramatta area to open a second office there. So if people are going to be looking at geographical expansion, we are very open to that, but of course we want to understand the nature of that, the thought process around it, and of course the risk management with that, and how likely is it going to be successful or not. Does an organisation have to have a current social enterprise in operation? What if they have previously run a social enterprise and can show data and evidence on this. So I think we are interested in people's background and experience, but we are looking for proven models, and proven being currently operating. So Lisa and Sally would be very happy to talk to organisations who may have a previously proven model that does have data to support it works, but I guess to be clear, we're looking for organisations that are currently operating, currently employing, far more so than organisations who are looking to get back into it, notwithstanding the fact they might have been quite successful at it previously. So we've got a question about disability enterprises. Are they eligible to apply? If the organisation is a DGR item 1, that does provide the eligibility. Question about partnering. Is partnering with another organisation an option, i.e. if our organisation is not ready but a partner has a suitable program, does that meet the organisation's, or does it meet the requirements? Once again, Lisa and Sally are very happy to talk to organisations who might have a more of a blended approach. However, we do try and keep it relatively simple. So yes, we're keen to understand how the partnership model may work, but partnerships of course add often to the risk in terms of who's delivering what and who's funding what. So there's no hard and fast decision there. That is very much a case-by-case conversation, really to help us understand the nature of the partnership, the complexity, the history of it, how successful has it been. But in most of the organisations we have funded through this social enterprise grant funding have been themselves standalone, single entity, their own DGR status. But yes, of course, we're happy to have conversations about alternatives to that model. Question about do you have a preference for social enterprises that create employment and job opportunities by paying award wages as opposed to work experience opportunities? I think yes, we would say we have a preference. So work experience is part of the journey, hopefully to paid employment, and here we want to get a sense of the impact that work experience may have on someone's journey to mainstream employment, or sorry, employment through a social enterprise, which hopefully leads to longer-term mainstream employment. We don't have a preference between organisations who themselves are job creating as opposed to training pathway creating. Some do both, some do one or the other. So we would see work experience as being part of the journey, but we certainly want to see it well articulated as to, well, what does that then lead to? Is it paid or unpaid? Our preference, of course, is for people to be paid where possible for their experience, to add that economic value to the beneficiary. Also got a question around I guess some of the benchmarks that we've articulated in terms of the business turnover currently when applying and what we're looking to achieve over time. One of the things we've called out is that we're looking to fund organisations who are already turning over $300,000 a year through trade, and that over 3 years we want their business growth to be greater than the value of our grant. So 300 needs to become at least 600, because if it doesn't, then on one view you're going backwards, which says that our grant funding is not actually assisting. We had applicants last year that the average entry point was closer to $500,000 in terms of their current turnover, and with a view to many of those organisations shifting well into the millions of dollars trade turnover per annum. So that is the context, and I guess and some of the background. $300,000 is the absolute, I guess, entry point to that conversation. So yeah, please bear that in mind. So we might leave it at that in terms of questions. Just reviewing other questions on the list, I believe they're substantially similar to ones that have been addressed, and we will look to circulate written answers to these just to provide further clarity. Had a question just around the capacity to, I guess, articulate targets and goals for the organisation, and that along the lines of our impact is grounded in creating opportunities for social inclusion through our business, through capacity building. Just reading it here. So employing people who are Indigenous, living with a disability, transitioning from prison. It's often hard for us to set targets and goals for each target group. Do you look for organisations that target and identified a specific group? To answer that, we're looking for organisations who are working within the target groups that we've articulated. Some organisations do that singularly, others do that across a multitude of them. So no, we're not looking for necessarily a target just around how many Indigenous jobs versus how many disability jobs. We're looking for the organisation to be able to tell a clear story and present targets around its total job creation, its total training pathway development for people across those audiences. So hopefully that answers the question. It's the, I guess, the macro level. Yes, of course we're interested in the finer detail, but the macro is certainly quite important in that context. So acknowledging that many organisations don't just target a single group in terms of who they're seeking to employ or help train. Question just about whether the webinar is recorded. Yes, it is. So a recording of this will be available to everyone who has registered. So an email will be going out with a link, and that'll be on the Davidson Institute website for some time. So certainly feel free to use the Davidson Institute website for information around financial literacy, business education. There's a whole wealth of content there, and certainly a lot of content built for the social sector, and please feel free to share that with your colleagues and other organisations. Okay, well, we might wrap it up. So thank you very much for sharing the time today. Hopefully that's been informative. Please bear in mind there are further webinars coming up, as I mentioned, around presenting financial information and risk management. Please dial into those if they take your fancy, and we will be sharing, as I say, the recorded link to this, as well as the link to the self-assessment survey as part of the follow-up email. So thank you very much.